Welcome to Pens and Needles. This is Erin and Inspector Ted, and today we are outside because it is fall. It's very exciting, nice and warm, and for today I want to do a really fun project where I show you how to knit a pumpkin. So I'll be using some of the yarn that I dyed to look like the Kinmokusei fountain pen ink right here. This is the skein. I also have wound it up into a ball, a little cake, so we're ready to start with it. I'll be using some double pointed needles. Now these might look a little intimidating, but don't worry, it's really easy once you get started, and the points aren't actually that sharp. These are size 2 because I'll be using sport weight yarn. You want to use a much smaller size needle than you typically would for knitting with the size yarn you have, so that you have a really tight, dense fabric. This way you won't have any stuffing showing through the pumpkins. Alright, so let's get to it. I'm going to show you how to cast on and knit this pattern, and I hope you enjoy it. Alright, so the pattern for this pumpkin is fairly simple. You're going to make a cylinder that starts with increasing a bunch, then knitting plain for as tall as you want your pumpkin to be, then decreasing the same amount that you increased. So you're going to cast on 7 stitches. And the first row you will knit 2 stitches into each of those stitches. So then you'll have 14. Now, in between each increase row and in between each decrease row, you're going to do 1 row of plain knitting. Now, I find it's easier to use a stitch marker to keep track of which row I'm on or round I am on when I'm knitting in the round, because there's not a clear start and stop. I use this repurposed earring. I think this is a really great way to use those earrings where it's lost its partner and it's really pretty and you don't want to just throw it away, so you can use it as a stitch marker. You don't have to go out and buy stitch markers. I find safety pins are also really helpful stitch markers because you can undo them and take them out if you accidentally knit over it. You're going to want to try to increase over the previous increases. If you look closely at your knitting, you'll be able to see this kind of wrap that you've created when you do your knitting 2 stitches into 1. You can also use additional stitch markers if you find that's easier. Now, the amount that you increase is up to you, how big you want your pumpkin to be. Remember, the diameter of the circle is going to be the width of your pumpkin in terms of how big it's going to get. So if you want a little mini pumpkin, you don't need to increase that much. If you want a really big, large pumpkin, then you're going to have to knit for a while before you start knitting up the sides. It will all curve out when we stuff it. Okay, so now I'm getting to the point where I'm going to knit up the sides. I'm going to make this pumpkin match the other ones in terms of height, so I'm only going to knit for about 2 inches. Alright, so now it's time for the decreases. You can choose to knit the decreases aligned with your increases, but it doesn't really matter. You're just going to make sure that you remember how many stitches between your increases you had last time, so that you can use that number between your decreases this time. You can also look back at your knitting if you've forgotten and just count with your knitting needle. Don't decrease all the way because you want to stuff it before you finish it off. Now for decreasing, you can use the knit 2 stitches together, where you just insert your needle into 2 stitches and knit them. You can also do slip, slip, knit. All right, so you have worked most of your pumpkin. Probably looks more like an orange at this point. I think these are, yeah, they look pretty similar. But you've got the increases done. You've got the height or length of your pumpkin done. Now on these ones, I've only done about maybe 2 inches of the flat knitting before I started decreasing again. So if you want it to be a taller pumpkin, you can make it longer. If you want it to be really flat pumpkin, you can make that part shorter. And then you start decreasing again. Now you don't want to decrease all the way in because then it's going to be hard to stuff your pumpkin. Now I like to stuff my pumpkin with materials that I'm not necessarily going to use for anything else and that might go in the trash otherwise. So this one, for example, it has baked beans in a plastic bag. Now when I mean baked beans, I mean beans that you put on a pie crust to hold the pie crust down while you're baking it. These are not soft beans. These are raw beans that were then baked multiple times and we weren't going to use them again, so I put them in a plastic bag and they're in here. I know that a lot of couches used to be stuffed with horsehair, so people in the past used to be a little more creative than we are. This one you can hear, this is stuffed with just plastic bags. You can also use fabric scraps or thread. So this is some fabric scraps that I've collected just today. This little guy was stuffed with some fabric scraps. Now, if you're really desperate, we have a very fluffy cat named Ted, and he makes a lot of fluff. So you could use this for needle felting or stuffing your pumpkin. Again, make sure that it's clean, right? You don't want like dandruffy cat hair. Like I said, they use horsehair for stuffing couches. What I think I'm going to try today, though, are packing peanuts. All right, so I'm sure most of you have received a package with these annoying, useless packing peanuts, which not only do they go into the trash, but they take up a huge amount of space in the trash, and it's just really bad. So if you can reuse them, that's ideal, but you can also use them by stuffing other objects. Now you might see that there's also tissue paper in here. That's a great stuffing material as well. If it gets too ripped up or wrinkled to use again, then you can stuff things with it because they're kind of like rod shaped. I'm going to put some of them upright so that they form nice little sections. I'm going to make a little kind of fence of packing peanuts. And I mean, I think one of the best parts about this is that it's free, right? It's good for the environment and I don't have to spend any money on it. And it doesn't take up space in my trash. So one of the best things about using double pointed needles, in my opinion, is that you can get really, really tight circumferences. Okay, one more thing that I want to add, just because I feel like we should share knowledge, is that in the earlier instructions I was showing you to knit 2 together, and that's by having one needle and the other needle and bringing them to be parallel to each other in the same direction, both pointing the same way. That's fine when you're working and it's loose, but when it's really packed like this, you might find it easier to do a slip-slip knit. So to do a slip-slip knit, you're going to insert your needle into the first stitch and pull it off without knitting it or purling it. You're just going to transfer it to your working needle. Do the same thing with the second stitch. Now you're going to take the resting needle and you're going to stab it in through those 2 stitches. Your 2 needles are pointing in opposite directions at this point. Then you're going to take your yarn and you're going to pull it around and pull it through. This is going to create a left-leaning decrease instead of a right-leaning decrease, which we were creating with the knit 2 together, but it makes it a little bit easier to maneuver those stitches. I think that slip-slip knit might be better for decreasing in these really tight spaces. So we're going to slip, slip, and then knit. Doing your work. Slip, slip, and knit. When you're getting up to the very top, you can tie this off in 2 ways. you can use a darning needle to thread the yarn through the last 7 stitches and just pull it tight, knot it off. You can also use your knitting needles like I'm doing here to knit 3 or knit 2 together until you only have 1 stitch left, and then cut that off and knot it off. Put it under, bring it up, and you cross it, and then you're going to go opposite direction. So if you don't like how it looks, you get to fix it before you fully tighten it. So then I'm going to knot this up. And I left myself a little bit extra here so I can retighten if I need to. So there's our little pumpkins. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope that you make your own. Please share a picture on Instagram. If you do, you can put the you can notify me that you shared it by including my Instagram name, which will be at the end of this video. And I look forward to seeing all these amazing cute little pumpkins. Make sure you remember, no one is going to see what's inside. No one has any idea. All right, thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you in my next video.